Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Community Church. We are so glad that you guys are here. And today's a great day to be at church because after this service, we are having a huge fall festival thing. We're calling our fall kickoff outside. So if you're here for that, you're going to have a great time. If you're joining us here for the first time, whether in person or online, thanks for doing that. Thanks for taking some time out of your weekend to be with us. If you're joining us on a boat or something, that's not cool. Take us out. Anyway, what we're going to do in the next few moments is spend some time singing together, putting our affection for God into song. If you're into that, that's great. We're going to have the words on the screen. You're welcome to stand and sing along with us. If that's not your thing, that's cool. If you want to stay relaxed in your seat, that's up to you. But we just ask that you take the words and consider them. But we're going to get started, so here we go.
There is healing in the power of the Lord Most High. There is courage in the shadow of His wings. There is peace unending over all my life. There is freedom that washes over me. I find all I need. I find all I need here in your presence, Lord. I open up my soul, and you fill me up with all I need. Here in your presence, Lord, where blessings overflow, there's always abundantly more. There is rest in the goodness of the Lord my God. There is treasure in the kindness of my King. There is comfort in knowing you're unfailing love. My provider, you set my spirit free. I find all I need here in your presence, Lord. I open up my soul, and you fill me up with all I need. Here in your presence, Lord, where blessings overflow, there's always abundantly more. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I could ask or seek, more than I could fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined. More than I can ask or see, more than I can fathom. God, your love for me is better than I imagined.
a seat. Thanks for being here with us today. Welcome to Community Church. Whether you're in the room or online, we're glad that you're here. If this is your first time with us, my name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm really glad that you decided to join us. And we have a gift for you that we would love for you to grab on your way out. If you came in through the basement when you were walking through that big room that's directly under us, there's a big pop-up banner in there. It says information, and on there, there's some information about us as a church. There's also these mugs that are like gift wrapped, and there's some stuff in there. Make sure you grab that on your way out. And if you're comfortable letting us know that you're here, you could go to communitychurch.net/connect or scan the QR code. It's on the screen behind me. And there's a little form there, and if you fill that out, that'll let us know you're here. We'd love that. And just to say thanks, we'll send you a little gift card in the mail. This is a really exciting time in the church. First of all, we have a fall kickoff, which is happening today, right after the service. You might have seen them setting up when he came in. We have free tacos from Swell Taco. There's going to be, Swell Taco's fantastic. There's going to be a moon bounce, some other blow-ups, an obstacle course.
Zebras.
Cotton candy, popcorn. My kids are thrilled because we told them they could go to the cotton candy machine anytime they want. Anyways, so we're hoping for a big crash in the afternoon after church. So that's right after the service. We'd love to see you there. It's a great chance. You know, we come in, we go out. It's a great chance to just meet some people, introduce yourself to some people in this community. We'd love to see you there. Also, community groups are starting very soon. The last day to register is tomorrow night. So if you're considering that, I've explained it a little bit before up here, but if you go to communitychurch.net/groups, that will tell you everything you need to know about being in a group here. It's been really good for my family, and I hope that you'll check it out. Finally, if you've seen any of the improvements that have happened around here to the building, or if you've seen some of the stuff that's been happening with this church in the community, everything that we've been able to do here has been made possible because people are generous, overwhelmingly generous. And if you would like to partner with Community Church financially, you could do that over at communitychurch.net/give, or you can give right on the app. But please, don't feel any pressure to give. We don't want anyone to feel pressure to do that. So thanks for joining us here. Before we jump back into things, let's take just a minute and let's say a prayer together. God, we are grateful. We're grateful that you love us and you accept us just as we are, with our shortcomings, with our doubts, with our mistakes, with our bad habits, with our struggles, with our failures, with our discouragement. God, you love us as you find us, and there is nothing we can do that will change that, good or bad. And so, God, I pray that you help us to rest in that today. I know there are some people that believe that wholeheartedly in here, and I know that there are a lot of people probably in here that are struggling to grasp that, or maybe don't believe it at all. God, I pray that today, no matter where we are, you would meet us there, in our stress, in our uncertainty, in our fatigue, wherever we might be, or in our celebration. God, meet us just where we are, as we are, and help us to leave here just a little bit more confident that you care and that you're good. Speak to us here. Speak to the deep needs of our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let's all stand as we continue to sing together.
Just one word, you calm the storm that surrounds me. Just one word, the darkness has to retreat. Just one touch, I feel the presence of heaven. Just one touch, my eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. Not a mountain that He can't move. praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Just one word, you heal what's broken inside me. Just one word, and you revive every dream. Just one touch, I feel the power of heaven. Just one touch, my eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Who praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's nothing that our God can't do. Not a prison wall He can't break through. Who breaks the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like His power. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that He can't move. Who praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall He can't break through. Who praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus.
I've been strong and I've been broken within a moment. I've been faithful and I've been reckless at every bend. I've held everything together and watched it shatter. I've stood tall and I have crumbled in the same breath. I have wrestled and I have trembled toward surrender. Chased my heart adrift and drifted home again. Plundered blessings till I've been desperate to find redemption. And every time I turn around, Lord, you're still there.
I was found before I was lost. I was yours before I was not. There's grace to spare for all my mistakes, and that part just wrecked me. And I know I don't deserve this kind of love, but somehow
It's a grace I could never add up to be somebody you used to want. Somehow
You love me as you find me. Don't deserve this kind of love. Somehow, this kind of love is who you are. It's a grace I could never add up to be somebody you used to want. Somehow, you love me as you find me.
Father in heaven, thank you that your love is so good and so positive towards us, that we can be different, that we can be changed, that we can be made whole, new, and right. Not in our own strength, because we know that we fail, that we can't even live up to our own standards, let alone yours. But more than that, God, your love changes us to become the people you have called us to be light, to be good in this world, reflecting your goodness. So, Father, it's our prayer today that the time we spend together in here, and then even the times after, God, that more and more and more we would draw closer to you and grow into the people you've called us to be. thank you for Jesus. Thank you for what he has done for us to restore us to a place in your family. We thank you in his name. Amen. Amen. Thank you for singing with us. You may have a seat.
All right, well, this week we are in the second part of a series called Make Believe. Make Believe. And if it's your first time with us, this is a great week to be with us because right after the service there's free tacos. And so that's a win all around, right? No, but also because we're talking about something that is central to who we are and what we do. A big, big thing. So last week, where we left off with this question. If you weren't here, just to kind of bring you up to speed a little bit. Basically, what I asked was for you to imagine what your life could look like with real faith. Real faith. Like real, unshakable confidence that God is who he says he is and that he'll do what he says he'll do. And I'm not talking about like the kind of faith that comes after sometimes, like maybe you go through something really difficult, right? And it's really, but then you look back and you're like, okay, I can kind of see how the good came out of that. You know, maybe there was someone who was up to something. No, but like in the fire, the moment after the phone call, right? As soon as you get the diagnosis, as soon as you hear the news, how would real, actual faith, confidence that there is someone who is good, who is carrying you through this, how would that change the way that you handle difficulty? How would that change the way that you plan the future? How would that change the way that you handle the unforeseen obstacles that life throws at you? How would it change the way that you live? Like for most of us, that's something that we want. In fact, no matter where you are in your faith, like whether you have been doing this for years or someone dragged you here and you're like, there's no way, I don't believe any of that. But just imagine, like pretend with me. Imagine there really was someone who cared and you really could trust him. How would that change your life? Most of us like the idea of that, whether we believe it or not. Now, when we talk about faith, what we said, this is important. When we talk about faith, what we're really talking about is confidence. Confidence. Confidence that God is who he says he is and that he'll do what he says he'll do. Now, I'm a real practical person, okay? I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm very practical. So I hear, someone, and I've heard this before, where it's like, oh, you just got to have faith. You just got to believe, right? And I would always be like, yeah, okay, but how? Right? Like, do I just have to pray a certain amount, or do I just have to read the Bible more often, or do I have to do the right thing, more frequently, or maybe I got to attend church for a certain amount of times, and then then the faith, it will just come, it will rain down on a magical moment, all of a sudden, boom, I trust God. How does that happen? Right? Or I told you last week, some of us will play Bible roulette. We'll be like, all right, let's see if God wants to say anything to me, and be like, right? It's like, okay, nope, nothing to do with my life. How do you get there? I used to feel like you either have faith or you don't. There are trusting people that have faith, and other people who don't. I had a teacher, I told you last week, I had a teacher when I was in middle school who just seemed to trust God no matter what. And it was like, how do you get there? How do you get there? We believe, and we didn't make this up, but we believe that there are 5 things that God uses to grow your faith. We call them the 5 faith catalysts. A catalyst is something that starts a change. And what's interesting is if you talk to people and you say, what is something in your life that increased your faith? People who would say that they have faith. everything that they say would fall into one of these 5 categories. And if we know what these 5 things are, if we've identified them, then we can look for ways to incorporate them into our lives. These insanely practical ways of helping our faith, your faith, my faith, to grow, right? So that's a series. The question is, how do you make yourself believe? You can't just muster up confidence, right? Trust needs to be built. How do we build that kind of trust? Today we're jumping into the first one. Before I tell you what it is, I'll tell you a story. If you were here last week, you know that my son, 5 years old, Logan, he just started football. Now, this is a whole new world for us, all right? He doesn't understand offense, defense. You know, like this is just a totally foreign concept. Never mind the details of the game, like the end zones and the yard lines and first downs and all this terminology. He is just like, what in the world? And at first it was overwhelming. And so I told you, like, when he would just start to cry because the football coaches were excited and he was like, well, I don't know what to do, right? And so I went up to the coach after practice. I was like, all right, what can I do to help him to understand football a little bit better, right? And by the end of the conversation, I ended up earning a spot as one of the helping coaches, which is great. I love it. I really do. And so, but I go to the practice, and the coach will say something to my son, Logan, and what I do is like kind of run over and translate, like real quick, okay, this is what that means, right? And then he'll do it, and he'll kind of look at me like up, down, did I do it? Like, was that it, you know? And so the coach, like one play, he'd be like, okay, you need to run to the end zone, right? Like, just go right up the middle and get into the end zone. And he's like, okay, yeah, coach. He looks at me, he's like, what? You know? And so I walk up to him, and I'm like, real quick, I'm like, okay, just go right down the middle. You see the fence? Just run to the fence. Get to the fence, and don't let anyone get you. And he's like, okay. So he goes, and he gets tackled or whatever, because that's what's going to happen, right? And as soon as the play's over, he looks at me, right? I'm like, okay, good job. Nice, you tried. And then on the next play, or a little bit later, he gets put on the defensive line, right? And he's told to go and try and sack the quarterback. He has no idea what that means. I'm like, all right, you got to get around this guy and go get the guy with the ball. And he's like, okay, fine. And so the play starts, and these kids are 5 and 6 years old, all right? The play starts, and the kid in front of him goes to block him. They lock hands, like fold hands, and just start like dancing with each other. And then the play ends, and my son's like, and he looks over at me, and I'm like, no, that wasn't it. Don't do that again. So anyway, like sometimes he gets it, sometimes he doesn't. And one day I was like, you know what? He needs to see what this looks like when it's being done right. He needs like a picture. He needs a snapshot of what it looks like when it's going the way it should go. And so I took him home, and we turned on, we've got Apple TV, I put YouTube on, and just showed him some highlights of a football game. And the first play was a running back breaking free, and he runs out to the end zone. And as soon as Logan sees him take off toward the end zone, he turns around and looks at me and goes, is he running to the fence? I was like, that's it. You got it. He's running to the fence, okay? So anyway, so we're in church, right? And for me, if you were to step back and think about some of the things that Jesus said about what it looked like to follow him or be part of the church, if you're familiar with any of those things, for me, I need to know what that looks like, right? I need a snapshot of like, okay, here's what it looks like when it's being done right. Like one time Jesus said, we did a whole series on this verse. Jesus said, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. That's pretty cool. You know, if that's true, that's pretty cool. That's not the way most people see what Jesus came to offer, right? Most people think of like this distant, impractical, formal religion. But Jesus said, no, I came to give life to the full. So I'm like, okay, fine. Well, then if that's like, what's the difference between what he came to really give and what we're doing? What does it look like when it's being done right? Some translations say abundant life. What's abundant life? Does that mean like you got a lot of stuff? You know, like, do you just have a really cool house and are you like Scrooge McDuck, you know, diving into his room full of gold? Like, what is an abundant life? Give me a picture of what it looks like when it's being done right. And what's pretty cool is that we actually do get a picture of the church in its baby form, in its purest form, and I would argue at its healthiest form. It's a little snapshot. And what's cool is that within this little passage, we also see something that causes your faith to grow. One of our 5 faith catalysts. It's the dominating theme in this passage. And so the passage that I want to show you is from a book called Acts. It was written by a doctor named Luke, so he wrote in like a lot of detail. And here's how he wrote. Like he would write all these things like stories, details, and then he would pause and kind of summarize and be like, okay, basically, so here's what happens. Then he would tell more, and then you're like, pause, summarize. Okay, so that basically, this is what that looked like. And that's how he wrote. He would write a little summarize, okay? So the first summary we get is of this baby church that people love, the church at its best. And here's what he says. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. Remember, life to the full, life at its best. Devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. So far, exciting, right? Not to the average person. No, I don't think so. But anyway, they devoted themselves to breaking of bread and to prayer. He goes on, he says, everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. Those are the people who were the disciples. They're now called the apostles. There's some real life change happening here. Like there's this sense that there is something real among these people. He goes on and says, all the believers, this church, they were together and they had everything in common. They shared. They still had their own possessions, but they shared. He says they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. That's another level. That's a level of generosity that is so foreign to us. It's not like I have extra here. It's like you're struggling. I don't have anything to give to you. What can I put on Facebook Marketplace to help you meet your need? It's generosity. It's a concern for people that is just so foreign to us. He goes on. And he says, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, which was the most practical place for them to meet if it was a big crowd. They broke bread, again, in their homes, lots of carbs. And they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. They were genuinely happy. They were praising God for this way of life. Are you ready for this? It says, and enjoying the favor of all the people. The people on the inside loved what they were doing, and the people on the outside loved what they were doing, which is not the reputation of the church today. Nobody would write this about the church today. But anyway, he goes on and it says, because of this, the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Meaning this force, this early church, it was this attractive, magnetic, like FOMO-inducing movement that everyone wanted to be part of. Now, there's a lot going on there, okay? There's like a bunch of different things that are not normal to us, phrased in different ways. And so here's the way one professor explains this situation. Same thing, here's how he explains it. He says, they loved each other with a radical kind of love. They took off their masks, not like, these masks, but like they didn't pretend. And they shared their lives with one another. They laughed and cried and prayed and sang, and they served together. He says those who had more shared freely with those who had less until socioeconomic barriers melted away. People related together in ways that bridged gender and racial chasms, and they celebrated cultural differences. Now listen to this. He says, this community of believers, this church, it offered unbelievers a vision of life that was so beautiful, it took their breath away. It was so bold, it was so creative, so dynamic that they couldn't resist it. And so they grew by the day. That's the picture of the church, of life at its best. This attractive, this magnetic movement that people wanted to be part of. And so, like I said, I look at this and I'm like, all right, there's a lot going on there. What is it, right? Like, what's the one, give me handles. Like, what's the one thing we can do to get to that point? What is the theme of this whole idea? There's one word, we actually see the word in the passage, and this is not only the theme of that entire passage, but really the theme of life in the healthy, like the newborn church the way it was supposed to be. Ready? It is one word, this dominating theme. And the word is fellowship. Like fellowship. No. For me, like that doesn't really get me very excited. I didn't wake up this morning thinking I was going to go, get my fellows and have some fellowship. It's not typically a word. In fact, you could argue that this is a buzzword, which is a series we did a few weeks ago if you weren't here. This word fellowship, the original word is koinonia in the original language. It comes from the root meaning common. There was something in common that unified them. I think a much more accurate and relevant translation for us is community. The dominating theme in the early church, the thing that drew people in, that people from the outside were like, I want that, was this community that people lived in. This is what made the early church at its best, life at its best, so good. Now, for a second, just forget about church for a second, right? Like, just think of life outside of church. We crave this. We need community. We can say, just for the sake of today, that community is life on common ground. Remember the word common is part of the root? Life on common ground. Community happens anytime you have something in common with someone and a relationship forms over it. So, if you drop your kids off at the bus stop and there are other parents at the bus stop, that's a community. You have something in common and you know each other because of it. If it's on a team and you know those parents because your kids are on the same team or you're on that team, there's something in common and you're united by it. And we were made for this kind of connection. We crave this kind of connection. If you remember months ago, we did the series called Really Happy. And in that series, we talked about people and the importance of relationships. I told you about a study that was done by some people from Harvard. They followed this group of people for over 70 years. They tracked everything they did, what they ate, how they lived, everything, and their overall sense of life satisfaction. And what they found was that there was a direct connection between their sense of life satisfaction and the depth and health of their relationships. It all comes back to community. To community. We were made to find common ground and to connect over that. And that can happen in the short term, or it can happen in the long term, right? Like it can happen in an instance with someone you don't know. Like I mentioned, maybe it's at the bus stop. You meet someone and there's a parent who's a little bit uneasy about sending their kid to school, and so are you, and you say goodbye at the same time, and you look at that parent and you're like, we're both feeling the same thing. Boom, connection. We were made for that. I remember when I was in high school, I went on a school trip. We went to Six Flags, and there was this really tall roller coaster. And for whatever reason, I was the only one in my group on that particular roller coaster. Now, I don't like heights. It makes like my palms, and just talking about it, I start to sweat from the palms. But I like the thrill, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'm in the front, and there's a row that fits 4 people. I get all the way on the end by myself. I click it in, and then you're in. When it clicks, you're in. And I'm just feeling myself, and all of a sudden someone else comes and sits over there and buckles himself in, and finally I'm terrified. And he looks over at me and he's like, me too. And all of a sudden it was all right, well, at least if I'm gonna die, you're dying with me. And we really were made for that. It can be big things, significant things like huge life choices, or little things like you notice the guy at the gym has the same deodorant, and it's like, it's why we talk about the weather so much, because we're all affected by it. It's why it's so easy. We were made for that in the short term, but we were also made for that in the long term. We need to know and be known by people. We were not made to walk alone. We were made to go through life with people who understand us, with people who love us. We need this. You need people, and people need you. We were made for community. Now that's true in life in general, but it's also true inside the church, right? And here's where we come to our faith catalyst. We believe that your confidence in God grows most often and most effectively in the context of relationships. And so our first faith catalyst, the one we're talking about today, is what we call providential relationships. Providential, meaning they're provided. It seems as if God put those people in my life to help my faith to grow. When you look back at it, it's like, I don't get how they got there, but they're there, and it's caused my faith to grow. Providential relationships. Now think about this. If you're somebody who's been in the church for a while, if you consider yourself a person of faith, who are the characters in your faith story? I guarantee you there are people in that story. I met this person, they brought me to this thing. I noticed this guy, this girl that I work with, and there was something different about them. I started asking questions. There are people that it's like where they just plopped in there, and now I'm different. I'm different because of them. We believe God uses people to grow our faith. Now, if you've been here for a little while, you know my faith, it's a work in progress, right? But the progress that I've made has been because of the people that I've known. I remember when I was in high school, I was like kind of living this double life, right? Like I was doing a lot of things I wasn't supposed to be doing, but I didn't want to get caught, and so I acted one way, but it was really, and it was like, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then one day it just all came out. And it was tough. Like I felt I lost all my freedoms. I felt like so much shame. It was really, really difficult for me. And the last thing that I wanted was church or church people. I didn't want to hear it from them. So I just like kept as much distance as I could. I remember at the time my sister was dating a guy who worked in a church. And so I avoided him like the plague. But one day he caught up with me and he came into my room and he's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, you know how it's going. But he just asked questions. Like there wasn't not the tiniest bit of judgment or condescension in his tone. He just like genuinely cared. Like your situation just stinks right now. I'm sorry you got to go through this. And he knew I knew it was my fault, but he was there for me. And I'm looking at him like, aren't you one of those church people? Like aren't you supposed to beat me up in the name of the Lord? Make me feel terrible? But he didn't. And that changed the way that I understood God. Like that was huge for me. Remembering that made me like curious about what he actually, maybe it was different than what I thought. Then I remember I went to college and I started asking questions, like really started asking questions about God for myself. Wanted to find my own answers. And at the same time, there was this guy that I worked with at a restaurant. We were both busboys. And he was doing the same thing in his life that I was doing in my life. Like we were both just curious, just wondering. And so he would come in and he'd be like, like one of those letters in the Bible, it actually says this. And I'd be like, really? That's weird. And then I'd go home and I'd like look it up and want to read it. And then I'd come back to him with one of my own things. I'd be like, that like this happened? Wasn't that nuts? And we would go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And what's interesting, like we started very critical, but we just got more and more and more and more interested. Until eventually, like both of us were like, I think this is a cool thing. This is a real thing here. And then eventually, we started talking about starting a church. Like, what if we could start a church that was just for people that have the same kind of hang-ups that we had? And for 4 years, we would just we'd go out together, we would talk about it, we would pray about it, we would go golfing together, and while we were looking for our balls in the woods, we would be talking about it. For 4 years. And do you know where that guy is right now? Minnesota. So he didn't end up doing it. But for me, those 4 years really changed the rest of my life. It was like somebody put him there. We believe that faith grows in God uses the people in your life to help your faith to grow. You need people and people need you. Here's the problem. We tend to dramatically underestimate the value and impact of people in our lives. Like everybody knows people are important, but practically, we underestimate how valuable they are. Think about this, okay? Imagine the future, maybe a year, 2, 3, 5 years from now. Everything goes the way you want, right? You're a success. You got everything you ever wanted. You made it. Fantastic. Your life is paradise. You're like, bingo, hit the jackpot. What does that look like? I don't know, maybe you're on the beach, maybe you got a lot of money, Maybe you got a huge house. Maybe you're just relaxing. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you're like Scrooge McDuck diving into his room full. If you're like the average person, you're probably thinking of a scenario that includes what you have, where you are, and what you're doing, right? On the beach, relaxing. But if you stop and think about your past, you think about the moments, the memories that you treasure most. Almost every time, they're about who you were with. Almost every single time. And you know this, like the right people can make the worst circumstances worthwhile. And the wrong people can make the best circumstances miserable. It is all about people. It's all about people. But we tend to undervalue the people in our lives. A lot of this is because of this idea of American individualism, which has led to like spiritual isolation in the church. We value independence. Like it's a value, you know, like a self-made man or a self-made woman. We value when someone can do it without other people, without a community. In fact, if you look at architecture right now, the trends in architecture in the average home, it used to be that homes had huge front porches. That was the norm. Now, homes have tiny front porches and big back decks. Like there was a time where you just would leave your house and maybe go for a walk before technology like took everything over, and you'd see your neighbors and you'd talk to people and have spontaneous conversation, you know, and someone would come over and knock on the door and it was a cool thing and it'd be like, get the cake that mom saves for company, right? It was a good thing. Now someone knocks on the door and I'm like, who's at the house without texting me first? You know what I mean? But the front porch was like the center of life. People just hang out on the front porch and look for opportunities to connect in the community. Now we're moving to the back, meaning like the default, the trend, and this isn't true, of course, of every house. The trend is to retreat to isolation, to rest and recharge without people. And I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm saying this is the direction that we're going in. But the problem is that right now we're also going through what a lot of people have called an epidemic of loneliness. Americans are the loneliest people in the world. And every generation is getting progressively lonelier. The University of Southern California they hired a director of belonging, because so many students were suffering from depression and anxiety that came from a feeling of loneliness. In the UK, they appointed a minister of loneliness. And this was in 2017, before COVID. A minister of loneliness. Right now, there's a pill. There's a pill in the works that will normalize the threat of social interaction, because so many people are having difficulty connecting with others. And after COVID, depression and anxiety became 3 to 4 more times more prevalent in our society between the months of, I think, April to June of 2020. It's because of the isolation, the loneliness. It's having damaging effects on us. Something that has, and I'm telling you this as somebody who recharges. Like, I'm an introvert. I mean, I like to be alone. I feel good being alone for a while. I'm also someone who loves technology, but smartphones and social media are making this even more difficult. If you like a guy named Simon Sinek, right? He writes a lot he's a pretty well-known author. He has this talk on YouTube where he's explaining what goes on in the mind when a cell phone is being used. He said, dopamine is the feel-good hormone in the brain, right? And you get a shot of dopamine whenever you have a spontaneous social interaction, like, someone has your deodorant at the gym, and so you celebrate that, right? Like, those are good things for the brain. But we get that same shot of dopamine when you get a like, a text, a message. Anytime you get a little ring, a notification on your phone, you get that same shot of dopamine. But with that, there's no social risk. And so if you're sitting in a waiting room or online at the grocery store, instead of turning around being like, hey, what's up? The price of corn is up, or whatever, we go down like this. And what that's doing in result, especially to younger generations, is robbing us of the ability to connect with other people. And so when life gets really tough, when we need more than ever to rely on the people that love us, we retreat instead of running to them. Because the norm is isolation, which is leading to loneliness. And this has transferred right over into the church. In the church, like there is a lot of just faking, right? We see a lot of people, there's a lot of people in the room, but we fake it, we pretend everything is cool. We come in, we go out, and we wrap it up, and it's over. There aren't, like we were reading before, this being together, breaking bread, taking off your mask, being yourself. You know what's interesting? People tend to drift from their community of faith way before they drift from their faith. We need one another. We need one another. Peter, if you know who Peter is, he was a friend of Jesus. He wrote that the devil, if you believe in the devil, he said the devil prowls around like a lion looking for someone to devour. Do you know how a lion prowls around? I like to watch like nature shows when I can't sleep because it's interesting, but it's boring enough that you can still fall asleep to it. So you'll see like these wildebeests, right? They're just hanging out with their wildebeest friends. Lions all around, just eating grass, don't care. Like they're not even there, don't care. Eating, Then like one sees like a butterfly and drifts away, lunch immediately, gone. When he leaves the pack, it's over. It's over. And that's the picture here that Peter is explaining. A good friend of mine, a person of faith, he was working years ago, and one day somebody started at his job, a woman, and he was very attracted to this woman. He was married, kids, and he was very attracted to this woman. And he like tried to resist her for a while. Eventually she approached him, and she told him she was interested in him. And he said, like, I never saw myself as somebody who would do something like that, who would leave my family and my kids for someone. But there was this, like, attraction, and it was extremely difficult. And you know what he did? He turned to his community, to his friends, to guys that he trusted, that he could go to. And he told him, he's like, look, I'm not proud of this, but I want to be with this girl, and she told me she wants to be with me. And they didn't judge him, they didn't beat him up, they didn't make him feel terrible, but they walked with him through this. They helped him to see what that kind of future would look like and how different it would be from what he planned his future would look like. And right now, he's still married with his family. But he wouldn't be there if he didn't have people to rely on, if he ran off by himself and decided to pray about it on his own. We need people, and people need us. So let me ask you this. Who do you go to when you're struggling? Who can you go to? Who do you go to when you fail? When you're just buried in shame and inadequacy? Who do you go to when you're doubting? Who do you go to when you're tempted? Who can you trust? And just say, look, this is me. This is me. And this is my, and who will walk you through? And who can go to you with those things? A lot of people can't answer that question with someone real. That's the norm. Or you can. Maybe you'd be like, oh yeah, of course, my sister. Like, oh, my brother, of course, absolutely. Okay, fine. Well, maybe you have that person. Well, when's the last time you went to them and told them you were struggling? Probably, even if you have that person, we don't go to other people. We run off by ourselves. That's the norm. And we don't have to live that way. We need people, and people need us. Like church at its best is community. This is life to the full. So we're starting groups. You've probably heard me talk about it. The deadline for signing up is next Monday. But groups, like for some people it's intimidating. It's like, I don't want to meet in somebody's living room. It's weird. Is there going to be punch? Like it can be a little bit uncomfortable. But the idea is you get with people that have common ground. It's like 2 months long. Sometimes a season is 3 months long. We do that on purpose so there's an off-ramp. Because sometimes you get with people and you're like, these aren't my people. It's just like, that's life. Sometimes you don't click with people. And so we make it easy for that to just end. It doesn't just go on infinitely. But if you're in a group and it works and you make it through the whole season, well, then you can sign up for that group and go to the next season. But we talk about the message. Whatever we talk about here, we process it. Be like, that didn't sit right with me. I didn't quite understand that. Or I disagree with that. Or like be real, take off our mask. And what you'll notice, the reason we close signups is because we want trust to form and relationships form. My group, we're heading into, I think, our 3rd season. And these people have become some of my best like some of my best friends. These are people that my wife and I trust, that we can share our lives with, that we can be vulnerable with. This is the picture of life in the church. And so, yeah, this was just one long commercial. But really, whether you're in a group or not, I want you to sign up for groups. You go to communitychurch.net/groups and sign up there. But more than that, I want you to have someone that you can go to. I want you to be connected in a group. That's the picture of life at its best. We do groups now. We did them on Zoom because of COVID, but our group are actually staying on Zoom. You know why? Because it's hard to get a babysitter every single Monday night. Our group meets on Monday. But now we just send the kids to bed, we open up the laptop, and we just talk to our group on the little squares. And like twice a season, we'll go to the beach, or we'll hang out, or do something. And our kids will play together. It's community. It's life together. And it's the church at its best. I'm going to ask the band to come up, but I want to leave you with this story. So I have permission to tell this story in case anybody gets uncomfortable. So one day I came home from work, I let my dog out, and in my garage I have this toy chest where we keep the kids' stuff, you know, the noodles and the cars and whatever. And I see it's just like busted. There's cracks in it, it's broken. And I'm like, what in the world happened to this chest, this toy chest? So I go upstairs, I'm like, Allie, my wife, I'm like, do you know what happened to this chest? Now, if you don't know my wife, she's from the South. She's the most gentle, loving, like you can't rattle her. She's just so sweet. She wants everybody to be friends. She's like the nicest person in the world, doesn't get rattled. And I'm like, do you know what happened to that chest? She's like, oh, I know what happened to it. I was like, what? And she's like, I just reached my limit. She's like, this was a year ago. She's like, Mia is trying to figure out her hybrid classes. Logan is trying to figure out preschool. For some reason, we have a puppy, and the puppy wouldn't come inside, and so Mia's missing her class upstairs, and I was just like, enough already. Like, I couldn't take it, and so I picked up a stick, and I just whacked the thing. And when she told me, at first I was upset because I wasn't there to see it. Like later on that day, or maybe it was the next day, we had our group meeting. And, you know, we're doing our little check-ins, like, hey, how's in Zoom with the squares? And it's like, oh, hey, how's everybody doing? And it gets to Allie, you know, and I wasn't quite sure what she was going to say, but she's like, you know, it's rough right now. It's rough. Like, this whole hybrid thing is really difficult. It's hard figuring out preschool. We got this puppy, and we got the church. We got all this stuff going on, all this uncertainty. And she's like, so I had this moment, and she just explains the whole thing to our group, the breaking of the bin. And every parent in our group just starts to like nod their head like, I get that. And here we have someone who's like did something they're not proud of and took it to the group and was like, this is my life. The ground was laid and everyone jumped on it. Like, I get that. And now, like, maybe she would have been weighed down with shame. Maybe she would have felt guilty or felt like she's not a good parent or can't control it or whatever. But instead, she had a group of people to walk alongside her with it. When I step back and I love this. I love the band. I love being up here. I love this. We're all like, I love it. But when I think about the church at its best, this church at its best, I think of moments like that. A snapshot of what it looks like when you're getting it right in community. When someone with an issue says, this is my deal. And everyone's like, we get you, and we'll walk you through that. When someone is struggling to conceive, right, and their group walks them through that. That's the snapshot I picture when I think of the church. When group members put Christmas lights on another group member's house because her husband is deployed overseas. Like, that's a picture of groups. That's a picture of the church at its best. When a group comes together and makes meals for someone whose spouse is in the hospital, like, that's a picture of groups, of community, of life in the church. That's life at its best. That's life at its best. And while this is a great thing, we love it, we'll do it forever. Like, the real life change happens in these providential relationships, these people that God puts in our lives and uses them to help us grow our faith. Let's pray. God, thank you that you love us. Thank you that you're good. Thank you that you care for us. And thank you that you work through people. God, would you give us the courage to be vulnerable, to open up and to connect with one another so that we will see the church the way you designed it, in community with one another. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We're going to sing one more song together. You're welcome to stand and join us.
Higher than the mountains that I face, stronger than the power of the grave, constant in the trial and the change. One thing remains: your love never fails, it never gives up. Never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love. And on and on and on and on it goes. For it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains. One thing remains. Your love never fails, it never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, never runs out on me. Your love, death in life, I'm confident, covered by the power of your great love. My debt is paid, there's nothing that can separate my heart from your great love. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love, and on and on and on and on it goes. For it overwhelms and satisfies my soul. And I never ever have to be afraid. This one thing remains. This one thing remains. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your love never fails, it never gives up, it never runs out on me. Your
Well, thanks for being with us here today. Sorry we kept you a little bit late. But if you are interested in signing up for a group, you could do that. You have till tomorrow night, communitychurch.net/groups. Right now, we're starting our fall kickoff outside with the bounce houses and the snacks and everything, so hope to see you there. But yeah, hope to see you next week. Have a good one.